Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's Sunday School lesson is entitled The Merciful Son of David. And our lesson is taken from Luke, that is the Gospel according to Luke, the 18th chapter, verses 35 through 43. We are continuing in the book of Luke. Luke, as we said last week and the week before last, that the Gospel of Luke is one of the most comprehensive of the four Gospels, whereas Luke contains detailed accounts that is not listed anywhere else. And Luke is responsible for the Gospel of Luke and also Acts of the Apostles. And Luke was a Gentile Christian and the only Gentile writer of the New Testament. Our lesson today has two outlines. The first outline is Luke 18:35 through 39, and it's entitled A Desperate Plea. The second outline is 18:40 through 43, and it's entitled A Divine Response. Now, the Luke's Gospel writes, well, one of the themes of Luke's Gospel is to show the compassion and the mercy of Jesus. And this example today, that is, Jesus heals a blind beggar in Jericho as he makes his last and final stop in Jericho before heading to Jerusalem for the last time, where Jesus will give his life for humanity. Okay, now let's go to our first outline. As I said, it's dealing with Jesus stops in Jericho on his way to Jerusalem, as I said, and he heals a blind man. He heals a man that was blind. Now, by the way, this stop or this travel through Jericho was a divine intervention. It was not by accident, okay? And this man, this beggar that Jesus healed. Now, Mark, the 10th chapter of Mark, identifies this man as Bartimaeus. You may have heard blind Bartimaeus, and we find that in Mark the 10th chapter, the 46th verse. But in our lesson today, Luke does not identify this beggar. But as again, he's identified in Mark, and his name was Bartimaeus. That is the blind Bartimaeus. Okay, let's look at our first outline. It's entitled A Desperate Plea, and that starts at verse 35 and goes to verse 39. Let's read the first set of scriptures. Verse 35 says, It came to pass that he was come nigh unto Jericho. That is, Jesus and the entourage. Now, rabbis and people, they usually travel in groups. And as they were traveling, they were in discourse. They were teaching. Okay, so we said, as he came nigh unto Jericho, a certain blind man sat by the wayside begging. Now, in that day, there was no welfare programs, and beggars were generally individuals with disabilities. They could not work. Okay, so that was the only way they could survive, was to beg, look for handouts. Okay, so this blind man that was a custom, because as if they would be on the roadside where the crowds were, they would have a chance of getting more assistance. Okay, so he sat by the wayside begging. Verse 36 says, and hearing the multitude pass by, he asked what it meant. In other words, what's happening? Now he's blind, he can't see, but he heard the commotion. And as I said, they usually travel in groups. So it was a multitude. And there were people on the street as well, wishing them on. It's just like when they have a parade, you have people line the streets watching the parade, okay? This the same concept. So there were people on the streets and there were people in the entourage. So it was a commotion. So he heard this and he said, what's happening? In verse 36, he said, what does it mean? What's happening? And 37 said, and they told him that Jesus of Nazareth passed by. Now, when they said Jesus of Nazareth, now that perked him up because obviously from this account that we're going to read today, he had heard about Jesus of Nazareth. Now, as we're going to talk about, he hadn't seen any miracles that he did, but he had heard his reputation. He had heard of Jesus of Nazareth's reputation. And that's what they told him, that Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. In verse 37. And verse 38 says, and he cried, he yelled out, saying, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. Now, this is interesting because he referred to Jesus as the son of David. Now, the son of David means the long-awaited Messiah. So this blind man, he recognized that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah. So he recognized that because he said, thou son of David, have mercy on me. Okay, and we're going to talk about a demonstration of his faith. And verse 39 said, and when they which went before rebuked him, and he said, and he should hold his peace, but he cried so much the more, thou son of David, have mercy on me. Now, the crowd tried to silence him, but he was persistent. Okay, his faith was persistent. He did not acquiesce to the desires of the crowd. As a matter of fact, he yelled out the more, thou son of David, have mercy on me. So this man had faith to believe that first he recognized Jesus as the long-awaited Messiah. He recognized that. And he cried out for mercy. And this, again, as I said, is an example of Jesus' compassion and mercy. And Jesus often shows compassion. He shows compassion for everybody. The Gentiles, the Samaritans, the sinners, okay, the tax collectors, the children, the women, okay, and anybody that the religious leaders considered outcasts. Jesus shows compassion and mercy on them. And Luke's gospel has a tendency to highlight that fact. And this is, again, as an example of Jesus showing mercy and compassion on this beggar. That was verse 39. Okay, so, and actually that's the first outline, is a desperate plea. So this man who recognized Jesus as the Messiah. Now, this man was physically blind, but note he was not spiritually blind, whereas the religious leaders was not physically blind, but they were spiritually blind. Think about that. Here is a physically blind person able to recognize the Messiah, whereas a someone that the religious leaders was not physically blind, they saw the miracles. This blind man had never seen Jesus perform any miracle, but obviously he had heard. These religious leaders, these people had seen Jesus perform miracles, yet they were spiritually blind. Whereas this blind man who had never seen Jesus perform any miracles, yet he saw it. He saw Jesus as the Messiah, but he was physically blind. Whereas the religious leaders was not physically blind, but they could not see Jesus as the Messiah. That's the irony of it. Here's a blind man can see the Messiah and who never saw any miracles. He never saw Jesus perform a miracle, obviously because he was blind. But he had heard and he had faith. Okay, so he cried out to Jesus, "Thou Son of David," which identifies him as the long-awaited Messiah. So this blind man recognized Jesus to be the Messiah. Okay, that was the first outline, a desperate plea. So he cried out to him. Even in the midst of the crowd trying to silence him, okay, he continued to be bold and persistent in his faith. Okay, let's go to our second outline is a divine response. That starts at verse 40, a divine response. Now, let's look at verse 40. Jesus stood and commanded him to be brought unto him. Now, in other words, as I said, Jesus was passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. So he stopped. The procession stopped. Jesus stood. When you say stand, they stopped. In other words, stop the music. Somebody is crying out for help because the man, we read it in verse 38, he cried saying. So the man was given a desperate plea for help. And Jesus responded to the man's cry. And verse 40, Jesus stood and commanded him to be brought unto him. And when he come near, he asked him. Now let's check this out. Saying, "What wilt thou that I should do unto thee?" In other words, what do you want me to do for you? Now you might say, well, didn't Jesus know he was blind? Yes, he knew he was blind. But if Jesus, by asking this question, we can see the man's faith. The man may not have believed that Jesus could heal his blindness. The man could have said, well, I need you to give me some money so I can get some food because I don't think you can heal me. But the man, listen to the man's response. The man said, and he said, "Lord," recognizing him that you have the power. Lord. He didn't say man, he said Lord, that I may receive my sight. So this man, by this response, we can see the man had faith that Jesus could heal him. So the man was not just looking for a handout, some money. The man knew that the man had faith to believe that Jesus could heal him. The man could have said, "What do you want?" "Well, I just need some money." "Okay, I need some money. Because really, I don't believe you can heal me. I don't think you're the Messiah. You just, just give me some money and let me go." No, he said, first he called him thou son of David, which identifies him as the Messiah. And when he responded, he said, "Lord, you have the power. I believe that you can heal me." Now, you might as well, Jesus knew that. Yes, he knew that. However, by posing that question, we can see, we can identify, here is the man's faith. He said, he didn't hem around the bush and say, "Well, maybe, perhaps." He said, "that I may receive my sight." So the man had faith to believe that Jesus could do it. That was his faith. He believed. The man wasn't doubting. "Well, I believe that you can heal me. Perhaps you can heal me. Maybe you can heal me." He said, "that I may receive my sight." You got the power, you can do it. You are the Messiah. Okay, so the man, we can see a display of the man's faith right here. Okay, that's verse 41. Let's go to 42. And here we can see Jesus echoing that same point. In verse 42, Jesus said unto him, this is Jesus' response, and Jesus said unto him, "Receive thy sight, thou faith have saved thee." So Jesus responded. It was his faith. The man's faith is what healed him. His faith, not Jesus' faith, the man's faith. He said, "Thou faith, your faith has saved you." Your faith. So now we saw it in verse 41 when he said, "I want my sight." He believed. I believe you can do it. And Jesus responds in 42. He said unto him, "Receive thy sight, thy faith has saved thee." It's your faith that have made you whole. Okay, verse 43, which is our last verse. And immediately, not several days later, and immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God and all the people. In other words, the man glorified God and the people. Let's read it again. He immediately received his sight and followed him, that is, followed Jesus, glorifying God, the man, and all the people. So the people rejoiced, the man rejoiced. Well, clearly the man was rejoiced. We know that. We clearly know that. When they saw it, gave praise unto God. And this, again, as I say, is an example from Luke, because Luke shows us the compassion that Jesus has for mankind, sinners, publicans, Gentiles, Samaritans, the outcasts. Okay, the compassion of Jesus. And it shows the faith that this blind man, this previously blind man, had in the Messiah, who had never seen him with his physical eyes, whereas the Jews were spiritually blind, but the man who was physically blind was not spiritually blind, because he had faith to believe that Jesus had the power to give him his sight. and which he did. And that's our lesson today, the merciful Son of David. Jesus is referred to as the heir of David, the son of David, a king forever and ever, who will rule over the divine kingdom forever and ever. We'd like to thank you for watching today. We ask you to join us next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review. Thank you.